would you be able to, I mean, this is a big ask, but would you be able to kind of describe a DMT trip to people who aren't familiar with it? And then we can kind of talk about pharma and ayahuasca and the differences.
Oh, well, I mean, I've just recently done a video trying to do this, and it's yeah. I mean, first of all, they just vary incredibly between them. But if we're talking about, say, DMT as in like a vaporized DMT trip, I think, yeah, I would say that they go into one of three categories. So category one is what I just kind of recently referred to as just like cosmic absurdity. It's just, and that makes it sound like I'm being, again, kind of like flippant or dismissive, but it's not. I think this is still an incredibly powerful, awe-inspiring experience, but it's just completely bizarre. It's just, bizarre in a way that cannot be put into words. So I've tried to use sort of, I tend to see like a lot of very flashing sort of imagery, like sort of all like hieroglyphics. There's some sort of something there which appears to be some kind of language, some kind of something which just seems fundamentally true. And I see this a lot across my experiences. So, but it's accompanied by just things beyond comprehension. So that's kind of what I call like this kind of cosmic absurdity trip. Then there's what I call like the sort of the mystical experience, where you sort of, and these experiences can cross over. You can have one which goes into the, or even both happening at the same time, which is, again, gets even weirder. But one where you're kind of feeling like something, sacred is happening, and you start going into this very kind of fluffy, almost religious sort of terminology, because there's just no other way of describing it. You kind of feel like you're in the presence of the divine. It's something, all these kind of ancestral paths that's, becoming available, but you're still sort of feeling very much like you in the presence of these things. And then I think there's kind of the other aspect of a DMT trip is just, it's something where it's very kind of cosmic. I've had a lot of trips where there's a kind of like a very sci-fi cosmic galaxy spanning, you are a comet traversing the universe kind of experiences. And then I'd say a very, very, perhaps, very niche experiences, and this kind of non-dual experience, which I have had a few times on DMT. So, but the main thing with DMT though is just it's so short-lasting, and it's just so powerful. And again, all these things can be all happening in parallel all at the same time, that you do have this kind of jump back from it, like, just what the hell just happened? Kind of, it's shocking in its weirdness. And that's different to the sort of ayahuasca or pharmahuasca experience, which tend to have a much slower, kind of more structured, more space sort of feel to them, where you feel that, okay, I'm here now, and you get a feel for it. And, sometimes it's pleasant, or sometimes it can be unpleasant or very challenging, but you feel like you're moving through it, and it comes up much slower, and you come down much slower. Whereas, yeah, the vaped DMT experience is almost like instant up, overwhelmingly up even, and then there's the sort of the come down is a little bit easier. And something I just done recently, which I hadn't done before, was changa, which is another form of kind of smoked DMT, and this is where you have the MAOI herb infused with DMT. So you're having a kind of like a smokable mini ayahuasca, in that it lasts longer than the pure vaped DMT, and you're getting all some of these MAOI substances as well. And so yeah, I've been trying that out over the last couple of days, and that feels more like the tail end of the DMT experience without the breakthrough. So you still get all the kind of the stuff, the kind of the afterglowy, shifting, pulsing, a bit of the geometry stuff, but you don't get this kind of ordeal kind of esque breakthrough and blasted off through the galaxy. So yeah, I've been doing a little bit of experimenting there, and I'm probably going to do a bit more experiments with that. So it's probably the tool of choice at the moment.
And so you use that term breakthrough, which is, I guess what I kind of casually call the DMT experience. would more precisely, as you said, be the kind of vaporized DMT breakthrough experience, I guess you could say, right? Where most people might say smoking, but actually you're vaporizing it rather than smoking it, as you say. And then you're trying to get a high dose in a very quick period. You're just trying to elevate your DMT levels in your brain to quite a high level. And then you have this, I think to me, I guess perhaps the defining characteristic of a breakthrough experience is a complete loss of connection to this experience of the world, and it's fully replaced with another reality. Is that, that's the kind of core feature of breakthrough?
Yeah, that's precisely the sort of the way I would describe it. I think it's the point at which the inputs you are receiving via your five normal senses just no longer apply. Something else is going on directly in consciousness, or it actually, it feels very much like a sixth sense has come online, and I think this is where you get all this. All the mysticism comes in around sort of like pineal glands and third eyes and all this kind of thing. But it does feel like something else has turned on. And, I guess you could sort of think of it, it's just happening purely in consciousness. So, whatever's going on in the real world, be it sort of, audio or visual, you could sat there with your eyes completely open and that other thing is still happening. And you can't turn away from it. You can't close your eyes from it. You can't put your fingers in your ears. It's just being like beamed directly into your brain in kind of real time. And it is a completely fully featured alternate reality. There is nothing sloppy or fuzzy or low resolution about it. It is hyper resolution. It's the phrase that people use, more real than real. And so and you almost to the point where you can cease to be aware of that you are actually a human being who has taken the substance. That you have to sort of come back into your body sometimes and remember that. It's like, oh my God, it's coming back to me now. I took a substance. So it's just an experience which is just almost impossible to sort of put into any kind of words. But I think that description of it just being beyond your existing framework of senses is just the only way to describe it, really. And it just seems so odd. And the other really, it seems so odd. It makes perfect sense when you're there, but it's just utterly bananas.
Yeah, I think you used the word shenanigans earlier, which really resonates with me because I'd say for me, it was very much like, if you think of, in neuroscience, we often think about our experience of the world like now as being kind of like a constructed reality. It's like a kind of controlled hallucination that I'm kind of generating from within my brain, all these images to help me interact with the world. And it's like if you imagine that there's like a screensaver or some wacky video game that's been put in as like another module in your brain, and it's like, oh yeah, you can turn on that, and suddenly you're in this absolutely perfectly constructed world, and it's just playing out. And it's, to me, the first two categories you mentioned of kind of the kind of wackiness and the divine or mystical. The first breakthrough experience I had was very much like you're yanked out of this reality, and there are all these entities, and they're fundamentally, the message is that the whole point of existence is it's one joke. It's just it's the most hilarious, ridiculous joke in the world, and the only thing to do is to laugh relentlessly for all of infinity, and to keep it's just some stupid pun like existence. And but then at the end of it, after all these wacky entities were kind of sending me this message, I was effectively kind of laid at the feet of God, and then just in a state of complete I don't know how I'm supposed to put that into words, but it can have both of those things, those aspects to it. And it's just literally the most unexpected thing in the world, as far as I'm concerned. I could not have anticipated that was possible. And when you tell people about it, they're like, I think people think, I almost get the impression people think you must be kind of feeble-minded if you're like, oh, you bought into your hallucinations and they seemed kind of real, and as if, as you said, it's some kind of vague thing. But it's just, it just slaps you around the head with this unbelievable experience.
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing, and I think that someone who's not had that experience would sort of, can maybe be a little bit skeptical of, because you would expect that you take some kind of substance and that would kind of like impair you in some way. So that if, the typical thing you see on TV is, oh, the walls are melting, so something is wrong with me, that it's, things have gone fuzzy, or I think there's something there, but there's really not. And it's not that it is so perfectly organized in its absurdity, and it makes so much sense. And even though, when describing, we're using these kind of words like absurd, I actually find it incredibly calming and beautiful. The kind of the cosmic joke is,
right.
It's very kind of resetting of, I always get these very strong vibes of that. It's okay. Just don't worry about it. It's just look how bonkers this thing is. What are you going to do about it? Look, all this craziness is just happening everywhere, all over the universe, and you're a part of it, and it's just fine. It's just fine, dude. Just don't worry about it. And I think that was one of the reasons it helped me overcome my anxiety. I found that sort of message. And again, it was a very clear message that I got from this sort of I interpret it now as an audio message, but really it's kind of something almost like you're remembering it in real time. But the phrase was given to me like, just do not worry about it. You're going to come in through that door and you're going to go out through that door, and it's fine. And just that sentence just kind of cured my panic attacks, because it was like, yeah, well, of course it is. It's just, this. Before I was in a different state of being, and now I am in this state of being as this human being, and afterwards it will be something else, and maybe that something else will be complete oblivion and annihilation, but that's the way it goes, and it's fine. Don't, what are you going to do about it? And so yeah, it's so, I think that's the thing that's very hard to grasp when you've never done DMT, just how much it makes sense in that moment. And even to this, when we talk all this kind of symbology and hieroglyphic language, you understand it perfectly in that moment. You read it like a book, and I always have this thought of, I will never forget this. This knowledge will stay with me forever. And then 5 minutes later, it's like you can't even remember the concept of what it is you're seeing.
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, the idea that the joke definitely isn't on you when you're definitely in on the joke of the universe, in these experiences. And, for me, that first experience, I remember going from feeling very kind of shocked and wide-eyed and like, wait, what's happening? As these are just in my face, like laughing and telepathically communicating with me and being like, welcome home, like we missed you. And I'm just like, wait, what? Like 10 seconds, like 30 seconds ago, I was just and at the same time, I'm thinking this is ridiculous. And I'm also thinking, how did I forget this is the structure of reality, that we come from here and we go into this would be some kind of simulation. That's how it feels. And so you're simultaneously like, how do I forget? I'm never going to forget this. As you say, like it feels so familiar and so right. And then I had actually completely forgotten this until you mentioned that, but I remember now going from feeling kind of like wide-eyed and shocked with these entities almost like kind of slapping me on the back and like laughing along, and just kind of, and eventually I basically became one of them. I just started kind of getting into the joke, and they were just like, do you see how silly it is? And then eventually I'm just like in my head in this experience, laughing like a maniac as well. So I think that's definitely, and that could be very therapeutic to feel, it gets you out of your evolutionary programmed concern with your own egotistical survival for this period that you exist as this mammal, right? That you're just like, reality's serious and we've got to take it very seriously, and it's all about survival. And so it can be very therapeutic, I guess, to be taken out of that.
I mean, I just that sort of as a an adult man in my sort of 40s, and just being able to come out of one of those experiences and just laugh like I've not done since I was a child. Sometimes especially with over Christmases, something happens and you see my kids just start laughing, and they're rolling around on the floor like kids do, and you forget a lot of that as you go through life. You forget that sort of, like I said, there's that sense of awe and wonder that you really have as a kid, and to be reminded of it is just such a gift. And so even though we talk about these experiences, it's like this 5-minute blast of just complete absurdity. There is something I think, very magical to that DMT experience. So, and that's kind of what made me want to revisit it recently. But there's kind of the weird counterpoint to that is you can get to the point where like the prospect of doing it is just overwhelmingly, I don't know if terrifying is the right word, but there seems to be a very weird disconnect between the amazing experience is on the other side of this pipe or vaporizer or whatever you're going to do, and the feeling that you get before it is the number of times that I've set out to have a DMT experience and just completely chickened out, even knowing that I will likely be like gushing about it 15 minutes later. And that's a funny, I don't know how is this our kind of like ego rebelling against us here? Because that's really what we're doing, is kind of obliterating our rational filters for 10 minutes or whatever.
Right.
I mean, have you got like a sort of the neuroscience take on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right there. I think part of it's to do with the how fast it comes on. And so you think of, if you're doing something like ayahuasca, suddenly you're having a very vivid hallucination, and there's a instinctive like this is a bit overwhelming. Should I push it away and try and get up and move around? And then you remind yourself, no, surrender to it. This is why I'm here. Mm-hmm. And so there's this like negotiation going on with two parts of yourself. Yeah. The part of you that knows to surrender and wants to move beyond rational thought, but then that instinct of survival. But with the DMT experience, I think you just don't have time to have that negotiation. You're throwing aside a whole part of yourself, your ego, the parts of you that are kind of to do with self-protection. And it's like a skydive. To me, it was like a skydive through the universe, and there's no way that's not going to be overwhelming. And yeah, you're right. It was an unbelievably positive experience, but I would actually describe it as mildly traumatic, because the next time I went to do it, my hands were shaking in a way that signaled to me a physiological stress response. Like I was, and I felt it psychologically as well. It took several months for that to really, to fully go away and feel like the thought of approaching it wouldn't make me feel a bit scared. And I've actually seen this in people writing about DMT. It seems to be a common experience, this almost like an aura of fear as you approach it. And even Terence McKenna, who's, one of the kind of the bard of talking about DMT, there was a talk he gave, I think, where he said, like minutes before you do it, even before you've got out the pipe and stuff, you're caught in this vortex of it, like it's coming, and psychologically you're in it, and it has this huge weight. So I do think it's something I'm intrigued by, the therapeutic effect for you, because for me, it was actually probably anti-therapeutic for me, like in the sense that it was an amazing experience, but it was unsettling and produced a kind of stress response. So I definitely think it's probably not for everyone, compared to, like the slow release stuff. I think lots of people could probably work with, but yeah, I'm intrigued to see in this kind of psychedelic renaissance where the intense DMT breakthrough experience, like what role that ends up playing, I guess, like if it's a therapeutic one or not.
Yeah, I think that's something we're going to have to kind of map out there, and it's strange because with something like the experiences around like DMT I've described, again for some people it can be just what they need. You can imagine someone who's like really hitting sort of rock bottom in like depression or anxiety or something, and it really, that could be the thing which turns it around. But just as equally, it could also be the thing that allows them to discover a new level of trauma to this thing. There's things can always get worse. So it's very. I mean, I always try and shy away from giving any kind of like medical or sort of like shamanic advice or anything, because I'm just not qualified to do that. If someone says to me, should I do this? It's like I can't say. That's a responsibility you have to take on. And I've used this phrase a lot of you are rolling the dice here. So I think the sooner that the sort of the science side of things can catch up and maybe provide a more steady framework of who is right for which experience and who should be doing these things, I think that would get us in a better place, because it does feel like a bit of a dice roll for people. And I've certainly been on retreats where I've seen people could have a completely negative effect to these things. And some of it, I think, is a negative effect to just the power of the experience, and some of it is that it's kind of, it's very hard to know what you're actually getting yourself in for. So it's one thing to, if you've had like sort of problems, a traumatic childhood or something like that, and you sort of you realize you're going into this experience to try and handle that, but still that doesn't quite prepare you for that moment where it just lands on your face just in one go, and all this kind of trauma to deal with in this sort of just instantly. It can be overwhelming for people. So yeah, it's I think that's something that the whole psychedelic renaissance is going to have to work out, and I think it's going that way with all the different sort of trials and stuff that's going on. So yeah, hopefully there'll be something more sort of concrete there than just people on the internet.
Yeah, I think I guess the problem is for a lot of mental health issues, especially with trauma, the issue is you're kind of trapped in your fear, and then if you think of psychedelics as something to be feared, they need a very, very healthy, they need to be treated with a lot of respect, but they really can be the way out of these issues of fear. And so I think a very slow, gradual approach, is probably the way. If someone takes a microdose and then maybe they try something like MDMA, where they're not going to be overwhelmed by any visual effects, and then you take a small dose of something like mushrooms. There's a path, right? I think people can test the waters, go slowly, make sure they remain grounded, and then something like the DMT breakthrough experience that's always going to be diving off of a high board or skydiving. But I guess there are people. If I went skydiving tomorrow versus someone who's done rock climbing and they've got used to how it feels to engage with their like adrenaline system and stress it out a bit, there's a difference there, And so I think we'll hopefully learn, the best way to kind of map this space.